Welcome one, welcome all, welcome into the Young Dad Podcast. I'm your host Jay, and with me, as always, is a man who always plays it cool, except when it's time to break your leg. It's Aaron. Give it up for him, people. Hey, Aaron, how the heck are you today, my brother?
I'm doing great, man. Another beautiful day, another chance at positivity.
I love it. I love it. Dude, we have an amazing show for the listeners today. It was so much fun talking to Matt. Matt is the creative, the founder, the everything behind the Unstoppable Dad project, the podcast, the website, the Instagram, the everything. Fantastic content. Just high energy, high positivity, high vibration, good vibes through and through all the way. I don't know about you, but I am ecstatic for the listeners to listen to this one. Are you?
I am. This guy's a wealth of knowledge, and he dropped a lot of gems throughout this whole episode. So, you guys keep your ears open and make sure you're listening to the message between the lines.
And this is one you might even want to take notes for. So while you're looking for your notepad and your pen, once you find that, you know what to do. Pull up a chair, grab a snack, grab a juice box, and let's talk. Thank you to our live studio audience. Matt, welcome on to the show. We're super happy to have you. We're psyched to talk to you today. Before we jump in here, feet first into the deep end, I have to ask you a quick question, kind of a running tally on the show. It's just very, very important to what we do here. Does pineapple go on pizza?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, baby.
Ooh, wow, that hurt. All right. Well, the current score for any of our listeners keeping tally with us is now 6 to 4 to 1. So Aaron's a bit happy about that since he's been kind of the loner, one of the few loners that thinks pineapple goes on pizza. So I guess you guys can talk and I'll just sit by. Um, anyways, all right, Matt. Tell us a little bit about you, your platform, and why you do what you do.
Well, so I'm a coach. I have been a coach now for 15 years. At the moment I work with dads predominantly. I help dads really just reclaim their strength and athleticism. So I've got a bit of a uh, I guess a fitness first mentality where the health of the body flows into everything else that helps. So I help at the moment about 50 different dads, to do that. Before I started doing that, I owned and operated my own gym for 11 years. And so I was lucky enough to do that, help people from all walks of life. I actually got into coaching through American football. So I started playing over here in Australia when I was in finishing high school, and I played that locally for 10 years, got to do a couple of representative teams, and then ended up moving into coaching football. And that kind of led me on the path that I'm on to then go into firstly personal training, then into opening up my own gym, and then going from there. So I'm on the Sunshine Coast in Australia, got a young family. So I've got a son and a daughter. My son's 4, my daughter's 7. Been married for almost 10 years now. And yeah, that's kind of me in a really condensed nutshell, and there's obviously a lot I can go into there, but that's covering off kind of the last 20 years of my life.
No, definitely covered all the bases there. So you mentioned that you train. You've been training people for what, like 15 years now, right?
Yeah, 15 years now.
And that's between football. When you say American football, do you mean soccer or like football like
No,
He means American.
I mean American football. I mean gridiron, like what we
like NFL
NFL
football?
football. Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
yeah.
I'm learning. I'm learning.
That's what I sometimes have to try and distinguish because it's American football. Australians would refer to it as gridiron. Most Australians would refer to it as gridiron.
Okay.
Um, so sometimes it's just getting the terminology right. But obviously, for you guys, it's probably football. That's yeah.
So you
Wow.
go ahead, Aaron.
So I didn't know that it's really prominent like that in Australia. Are there like leagues around to play in?
Yeah, so there's local leagues. So I grew up playing all sorts of sports. I grew up in New South like rural part of New South Wales where down near the Victorian border, which is where it's predominantly AFL. So that's kind of what I was exposed to from a young age for a sport. Don't know if you've ever seen AFL, but it's basically like everyone's punting the ball back and forth to each other and trying to score via punting the ball back and forth on a field which is like almost twice the size of an American football field. And I grew up playing that. And then we moved up to Queensland, and Queensland is a rugby league state, so it's a different code of football. So I started playing that when I was all the way through high school and in grade, and I was okay at it. I was never great. And then in grade 12, I had a friend that we found a local American football club, and he said, "Come and have a go at this." And I just I fell in love with it at that point. And it's still a very fringe sport. It's a very fringe sport. The sport's grown massively since I first started playing. But when I first started playing, there was still there was an organized league in each state, which there still is now. We have I've been lucky enough to coach on like national teams as well too. So they run for under 19, so out the youth football programs. We've been able to go over to Mexico and China and play in the World Cup that the International Football Federation organized. So while it's not like one of the top tier sports over here, there's still organized leagues over here.
That's really cool. So the IFL is like indoor football.
No, it's IFAF is the name of the governing league. So it's IFAF, which is International American Football Federation or something like that. So it's actual, it's outdoor football, pads and
Okay, I
helmets,
see.
the whole lot. The difference is like, say for example, with the U19, the under 19 World Cup that we played in, you're looking at kind of Div 3 NAIA like college kids that are playing in it. You're not going to get your kids that are your Div 1, Div 2 college recruits playing against our guys who, have limited exposure to the sport.
Yeah, because those Div 1, Div 2 guys are probably the ones that are getting looked at by tons of other places.
100%. And it's an amateur sport. At that level, it's amateur. It's not professional. So those
Hmm.
kids that are looking, and we've got I've been lucky enough that I've had some kids that I coached at a local level actually go over and obtain scholarships. Two most recently had one in Hawaii and one at Indiana who I think get transferring at the moment. But we've got some kids that are able to go and get scholarships at these Div ones, and even some of them opt out of playing for the national team just because the chance of getting injured is just not worth them losing the scholarship that they've or the opportunity that they've got to go and play under a scholarship.
No,
Yeah, I
that
got it.
100% makes sense.
So, it's interesting. Has there been any news of, the XFL picking from your local leagues? I mean, I know it's probably a long shot, but
I
I
don't.
do know that they're trying to diversify and find talent from, all across the world as opposed to just in America.
Yeah, and not that I've heard. To be fair, even though I started in that sport, I've been pretty. I kind of stepped away from coaching that particular sport around COVID. We were kind of set to go and do the World Cup in 2020, and that got cancelled because there was obviously no international travel. And at that point, um, because I had the gym at that point, the gym got shut down. So there was other things that were on my plate where I kind of gave away the coaching of the sport. But I'm still kind of keep my finger on the pulse with what's going on. So nothing really from the XFL. There's actually a fairly big push from the NFL coming into Australia, not so much from a team, but talent recruitment. There's a couple of Jordan Mailata who plays on. He's he's a tackle for the Eagles. He's Australian. There's a few and mainly offensive line, defensive line there's a few players outside of punters that have come from Australia that go through, I think it's like the international player pathway or whatever it is that they call. So there's more emphasis from the NFL kind of coming down the pipeline to look for talent to go over, but not so much from the XFL.
Yeah, I know. I remember pretty recently Jared Hayne coming
Yeah,
from rugby.
yeah,
He was a pretty good standout. It just never caught on.
yeah.
But that's so interesting. I can't wait to see if that develops.
There's been
There's so much talent now.
there's been within the sport. There's probably been more like Australia as a country only has I think from memory like it's got 28 million people, right? So it's not a super big like that's the entire country. Um, but we've had like Jared Hayne has been the most high profile one, but there's guys that have had a lot more success than him. Like there's Adam Gotsis, who's a kid that played local football down in Victoria, who's now I think he's in his ninth year. He's playing for the Jags at the moment. And then you've got like Jordan Mailata, who even though he didn't play local football, he didn't have the profile of Jared Hayne in rugby league um, before he went over there. And then you've got like Jesse Williams who played local football. Like he would played for Alabama for a few years and then played for the Seahawks. Like there's been some guys that have gone over there
Yeah.
outside of the kickers and punters who have had like a good amount of success in the sport. And I think one thing that like the league in Australia is doing a lot better now is they're highlighting those guys rather than the high profile guys like that have gone over there and maybe not have had as much success.
But like guys who still went over and like did it.
Yeah, and actually did it for a good amount of time, you know. Like I said, you
Yeah.
know, there's guys that are actually still playing in the league who have had, you know, multiple year tenures, whereas and there's Jared Hayne as a human being is a little bit of a dirtbag, just personal opinion. He's actually just been released from jail, so that's that gives you a bit of a that's
That's how that's going
that's
for
that's
him.
how that's going for him. But
Yeah.
um, you've got some decent human beings that have actually gone over there and are having like decent careers, like Jordan, who's I think what he's maybe in his fifth year now, and then you've got like Adam Gotsis, who's like 9 years. Like you've got these people that are actually doing it properly, who have gone through the right way and not just kind of ridden the coattails off the back of success in other sports.
Yeah. No, I mean there's one guy on my Seattle Seahawks, Michael Dixon. He's from Sydney,
Yep.
our punter. And of course it's hard to find some of those guys in the NFL outside of like the kicking and the kicking game because it's just so much more common
Yeah.
that those are the guys that are like highlighted and kind of picked out from these countries by colleges. So
Well,
no, I think it's important that they highlight these other dudes from these other positions.
there's such a different skill set to what happens in our sports, like our primary sports over here, when it comes
Hmm.
to like the other positions on the field. Like there's just such a vastly different level of knowledge and skill that needs to be had. But like punting, yes, there is a lot of technicality that goes in it. But if you grew up in the same area that like I grew up in my early years, like we are literally punting the ball back and forwards to each other in our spare time. So it's a natural progression that like there's a lot of people with very big legs out here that can slot into a team and punt the ball like with decent hang time and know the mechanics of that because it's just exposure. And that's the thing with anyone that's good at sport, like exposure sometimes the biggest thing that you need in order to actually get good at something.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's very common to over here to where we're taught from like a young age, like we're taught throwing the ball instead of punting it, kicking it. It's all throwing. You're always throwing a ball back and forth. A football, any ball, it's always throwing over here. So that's interesting that it's so different. One's arms, one's legs.
Yeah, and there's transferable skills. Like athleticism is transferable, like it's universal, but then there's actual game knowledge. And if you're looking at, say an offensive lineman, you're looking at somebody who's had 10 year, like, let's say, how many years you're in high school, like let's say 3 or 4 years in high school and then 3 or 4 years in college. So you've got 6 to 8 years to play catch up on just knowledge of basic techniques. Like that's a deficit that it's going to be very hard to make up.
Yeah,
Like you would have to have an exceptional level of athleticism. And the fact is, like, when you're at that level, everyone's got an exceptional level of athleticism. Like that's why they're there.
exactly. Yeah.
So it's a hard, like that's where that side of things, for people to come from Australia and be able to go and play at that level and do it for such a long time, like it speaks to their work ethic and their character to be able to get to that point, because they're making up a deficit, which is a very, very hard deficit to overcome.
Most definitely. No, that makes a lot of sense because I mean it's just not here. Those defensive and offensive linemen are being taught the specific stances that they're going to use for the rest of their lives, and the progression through college football and to the NFL. If they're of the athletic profile that matches. You know, but at the end of the day, athleticism can still win out. Athleticism and work ethic can definitely win out in a lot of cases because even though they're taught something, they could be smart enough, have the work ethic, they might not have the athleticism, or vice versa. They could have all the athleticism and zero of the work ethic to put in the work to actually get there and to outwork those other freak athletes just like them to get that spot that they want if they want it bad enough.
Yeah, and there's a tipping point, like where I've been lucky enough that I've coached a lot of young men, like, yeah, from kind of 13 to 19. When I first started coaching and coaching football, that was kind of the age group that I was focused on coaching. And it's you meet these kids that are so athletically gifted and so athletically superior to most other kids there, but they have no drive and no work ethic because they've always had that they've always been better than everybody, so they've never really had to work for anything in their life. And then when it gets to the pointy end where all of a sudden I'm in a scenario where everyone has the same level of athleticism that I've got now, like it's that make or break point where the only thing that's going to separate those guys is going to be the work, like the work that you're willing to put in has to be more than the other person, because the level of athleticism nulls out. And there's some kids that have so athletically gifted that when they get put in that situation, they just fold. Like they just don't know what to
Yeah.
do because they've never had to work for it before. And it's like it's almost a sad thing to see, because sometimes it gets to a point where you can't teach that to them because it's too late to be taught. And that's, or they don't want it to be taught because they just don't have the drive to go that little bit further either.
Yeah, no, that's super common in American professional sports. Like you see it year over year, every single major North American sport: baseball, football, basketball, hockey, soccer. You see just these highly touted kids coming out at 17, 18, 19, all the way up to like 22 years old, and they're just amazing, athletes coming into the professional sport of their choice. And then they get there and they just completely flail out. Where it's like, man, how did this guy who was just amazing in college, who was playing against top notch competition in the freaking SEC with all these other top 10 schools, he dominated them, but now he's here and he's the worst player on the team. And it goes back to what you're saying. They're athletically gifted and they've only relied on the athleticism because they've never had to put in the work. Now it's time to put in the work.
So
They're nowhere to
Matt,
be seen.
I'm interested. So with your training, what are some of the things that you think as a parent you can do to combat, some of the negativity and help motivate them to push their goalpost a little bit further?
I think it's for me, like as a parent personally, and this is something because you can speak on it as a coach when you don't have kids, but then as soon as you have kids, your whole thought and dynamic changes around it, and it's one of those things where what I think needs to be done hasn't actually changed, but understanding what has to be done as a parent, like it changes the way I think about it. Like you have to put your kids in positions where they're going to fail and they have to work out how to get out of it. Like and doing that as a parent is easier said than done. And I'm not talking about like catastrophic failure because we don't want to put them in a position where they're going to get hurt, or we don't want to put them in a position where it's going to cause permanent damage in some way, but controlled environments where they have to learn to work shit out and get out of stuff. That's like the biggest thing I think, because some of these cautionary tales that I've seen, they've never been faced with enough adversity where they've had to go, all right, like now it's time for me to actually push through and keep moving forward. Or I've got to be a little bit resilient in this situation to shift my mindset and my mentality to, all right, now it's time to actually put in the work. And there's so many, I mean, there's so many, like that for me is the number one thing. Um, and then just letting them understand that like work has to be done. Like there's no shortcuts, there's no easy fix. Like it sounds rah rah a motivational speaker, and I don't like to come across that way, but that's just the way it is, like it's life.
No, 100% agreed. So when you're coaching and you're working with these clients and you're working with these kids especially, physical isn't always the hardest part of it, right? There's the mental and then the emotional aspect of it. As part of your training, how do you help your clients, like whether it's a child, a dad, or a mix of the two, or anyone you worked with in the past? How do you help them get over those hurdles when those hurdles come? Because you can plateau physically easily, and then you get messed up in between the years and whatnot. So what's your approach in those situations?
So I mean, first, like biggest thing is it's like things are always going to be context dependent, right? Like it's going to be dependent on the individual and the
Yeah,
situation.
of course.
That's the thing. But like if we unpack it a little bit and kind of go back, and let's say somebody's plateaued in their training or their sport and they want to try and overcome that, right? We've got to kind of go like try and get that back to the point, like where was that failure point, and then work out why it failed. Like what was the reason that it failed, and then if it's a mental thing and it's a confidence thing, like confidence comes from reps. Okay, and confidence comes from feeling adept at something. So if we can get it back to a point where we're doing maybe a lesser version of that activity, or we're honing a skill which is going to make us better at something, and then getting good repetitions of that, so that then when we revisit that particular scenario, we're better equipped to deal with it. And not only that, like we've addressed that underlying point of failure. But I mean, it's so context dependent. It's like it depends on what it is that they've failed at. If they've, let's say, for example, someone's failed at a lift, or they don't feel like they can lift something. If it's mental, yeah, sometimes like a general G up talk will, like, come on, let's go, like give them a bit of a rev up can help. But if they're that in their head that it's very hard to overcome, sometimes we need to take a step right back, understand exactly what's going on here, and then address any deficits or deficiencies that may have led to that failure. Um, yeah, I mean I, that's a tough one to kind of answer, just because there's a lot of variables there that it makes it hard to give a really concise answer.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, so Matt, it's so funny. Recently, my daughter and I we've started jujitsu classes, and when we got you as a potential guest, and we're going through all of your media, I was just so shocked because a lot of what you preach and what you post is exactly what I'm going through now. The program doesn't really specify, that uplifting of fathers and getting them back into their prime states and helping them be the best they can be. But just naturally, uh, the jujitsu place that we go to has done that for me and for my daughter as well. It's helped her. She's competing more with herself than with the kids in her class. She's looking forward to going and learning a new technique or being better. And I see that same thing in me. It's completely changed me. So you know give us what does that do for a man, and why would you encourage that for someone that's kind of on the fringe, doesn't really know if it's for them? Like, how do you push them into it, and what are some of the things that come out of it?
I'm a massive advocate of jiu-jitsu. Obviously, if you've spent any time on my social media, you'll see that I love it. I've done it for 7.5 years now. But like if we the big thing, there's so many things with jiu-jitsu, right, that I think are universal across any physical activity. The first thing is getting there and just showing like it's hard and doing hard stuff, especially as a man, and doing it consistently and overcoming that, like it sets a level of belief in you that you can go and take on other things. And as a dad, it's it's sometimes hard to overcome all the things that need to be done, and and we don't celebrate the things that we have done and the things that we've done well. But going and doing something hard over and over and over again just sets you up to be able to tackle anything really. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy when you get to the point that you can tackle that, but that helps. And that doesn't matter whether it's jujitsu or it's lifting weights or it's going and doing, something that some form of physical activity. I think just physically exerting ourselves is just something that is so primal within our DNA. When we connect with that, it almost unlocks and unleashes this thing that maybe we didn't know that we had inside us, or for some dads, we used to have inside us and we've kind of lost along the way of trying to provide for our family, trying to make sure that we're a good husband, good father, and we're doing all these things for everything else. So we forego the things that we want to do to make sure that they're all taken care of. And that's that natural provider urge, which is really hard for a lot of us to overcome. And like it's something that like I felt guilty to when I first had kids. Well, when my daughter first came along, just because that's just what we need to do. We need to make sure that they're taken care of. Like these little humans come into the world and they're 100% dependent on you and your partner. So if we don't take care of them, who's going to? Like no one is. And it's easy to get caught up on that and think that we need to put everything into there. And then once we start spending some time for ourselves, we understand that it actually enhances every other thing that happens in our life. And then if we couple into that, we're doing something like jujitsu or we're doing something some form of training where we're actually physically exerting ourselves to the point where we're struggling and then we're overcoming that struggle. Not only does that feed into us being more capable and we start progressing in something, but our confidence starts to build, and that's going to flow onto your kids as well too. Like they're going to pick up on that. Like if you love something, like my son now, he's just about to turn 4, and every second day he's asking me when he can start jujitsu because he sees me, like he knows I love it. My daughter hasn't been so interested in it. It's something that like I'm very keen to get her into, because I think it's very important for girls to know, like have some level of self-defense, and but that's kind of shooting off into another topic. But I think that just doing something hard creates that confidence in us. But then more importantly, like as a dad, if you've gone from like a lot of dads that I deal with have had like some level of athleticism in their past, right? They used to do something that they enjoyed, whether it be go to the gym, whether it be play sports, or whatever the case might be. And they just don't know how to make it fit in their current life because they've got other commitments that are different to what they had when they were doing that thing previously. And what really needs to happen is they need to almost let go of that previous life, draw a line in the sand and go, righto, I'm going back to do this thing because I know I enjoy it. And that's a very important thing. Like, you have to do something you enjoy, but I'm not attached to the idea that I have to be at this level because a past version of myself was there, because that's not fair on like where you are now as a man and as a human being. And that can suck so much of the enjoyment out of any activity when you're in that constant comparison state of comparing to how far away from something you are compared to where you are now. And that's like something that stops so many people dead in their tracks of making any change, because they look at the mountain that they've got to climb rather than just focusing on putting one foot in front of the other and taking those steps and stacking those wins.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I can completely relate to that. Everything you just said is like, it's like the whole journey you take. You know what I mean? It's like, for me, it was I finally settled in to the place we're living now. I was able to, have free time. I didn't know what to do with it. And, I seen it as something for my daughter. And then when I hopped on the mat, I fell in love with wrestling in high school, because I fell out of love with football. I was in football a very long time since a young age. And then, you know, when I got into high school, um, I hopped on the mat for the first time and I fell in love with it. And like you said, life happened, you got away from it. Had to grow up real quick, be a dad. And, I put all my passions to the side. And so through this, I kind of hopped on the mat and it clicked in my head, oh, I needed this. Oh, this is what was missing, and it's you feel it so much with different things in your life, whether it be, video games, drinking with your buddies, shooting the shit, what, stuff that's very negative, and this has been a big change in my life. So it's, I'm more accountable with myself. I do other things to help support me in jujitsu. So like, going for a run, trying to get the cardio better for the session, even time management, trying to schedule better, it's eating better, everything, it's a whole lifestyle change. And so with something like that, what is something that, or what's a first step that someone can take to try and, start their journey?
As cliche as this sounds, it's just showing up. Like, you've just got to show up and do it. Like, you've got to get out if because a lot of people, when they go to make a change, the only thing stopping them from making that initial step is themselves, right? Like, there's there's reasons and there's excuses, and I think what happens is a lot of people legitimize excuses as reasons, and they make something that they can turn, an anthill into a mountain. It's like how they start thinking about worst case scenario, and then when you show up and you do it, it's actually not that bad. Now, there are going to be things like, so jujitsu. Let's use jujitsu as an example. Like, I love it, and I think everyone should try it, but there are going to be people that probably shouldn't do it. Like, if you have injuries that, somebody tugging on your arms, or like, you've got fused vertebrae in your neck or something like that, so somebody trying to strangle you is probably not going to be the best thing for your long-term health. It might not be the best place to start. There might be some other starting point. So things like that are almost genuine reasons, right? But there, for a lot of people, there's actually less of them than what most people think, I believe. Like, I think a lot of the reasons that stop people from starting really come down to their own mind, their own fears, and also they're scared. Like, especially with something like jujitsu with males, like, it's that ego. It's putting that ego aside and understanding that, all right, my mindset when I first went and started jujitsu was like, I'm committed to do this for like 10 years. I'm not going to try and get like a blue belt. I'm not going to try and get like, I'm not concentrating on belts. Like, I understand, I have the inherent understanding that this is a long-term thing. And that mindset came about from doing previous martial arts, also having coached so many people and seeing that mindset of I'm trying to do it for the short term, jiu-jitsu is not the type of thing you can do for the short term. Like you do it for 6 months, you're only just starting to understand little bits of stuff. Like I've been doing it for 7.5 years and I still learn stuff every time I go to class, every time I step on the mats. But you only get to that point if you take that long-term mindset. It doesn't matter whether it's jiu-jitsu, doesn't matter whether it's training as well too. Taking that long-term mindset and then having realistic expectations about where you want to go. So if you can get past your own shit in the first place, showing up's the first step, but then also having realistic expectations. So then if it, you know, jiu-jitsu is one thing, but let's say, for example, someone wants to lose weight or they want to, be able to get back in the gym. Understanding that, like, probably going and jumping in and doing 6 times a week, if it works in the short term, is probably not going to work in the long term. But doing 3 times a week is probably going to be sustainable for the next 5 or 10 years. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to stack those wins. That doesn't mean I'm going to show up 3 times a week every week, but for the vast majority of times, I'm going to show up and I'm going to do that because I've taken that long term mindset of I'm doing this for the future rather than just doing it for now. And I think that's also why a lot of older men get like where I train, there are a lot of quote unquote masters athletes, so over 30s. And I think that's why a lot of older men get attracted to jujitsu because they have that mentality shift around, all right, like I'm ready to commit to this for the long haul. I'm not here for it for the short term because I look in hindsight and I think if I had started this in my early 20s, I'm not sure that I would have stuck with it because I don't think I would have had the maturity and that mentality to stick with it. I think it would have been too much of a kick to my ego and I potentially would have given up. Now I'm super stubborn, so I might have also just been like stubborn my way through, but it's one of those things. That's what I reckon. I think just firstly, you've just got to do it, but then secondly, um, having a little bit of a realistic expectation about what you want to get out of it is one way to make sure that you can consistently stick to it and then continue to show up afterwards.
Most definitely, man. I love all of that. That's so true. I mean, the mindset you talked about there, you have to think long term and you have to think realistically what you're gonna want out of it. And that's how you can approach so many different situations just in life. Like, what am I going to want out of this? Whether it's relationships or a difficult conversation you have with your significant other or your kids or possibly like your kid's school or like another parent or whatever the heck it is. You have to think like, what am I realistically wanting out of this? And then I love what you said about stacking the wins because you have to stack those wins on top of each other. You have to celebrate those individual milestones and accomplishments along the way. For me personally, I'm a baseball player, and I love what you said a little bit earlier too about kind of letting go of that past self because I was, even now up to the last couple of years, I've gone and I've tried to play like um, adult wood bat league baseball here locally and try to replicate a version of myself from 10 years ago that was being recruited to play college baseball before an elbow injury. And I've been trying to replicate that, get that back, get my shoulder back, get my throwing and everything back. And honestly, it clicked for me. It's like, I'm not that anymore. I'm 10 years older, 10, 11 years older now. My elbow doesn't work the same. I don't throw as hard. It's nothing like that. So that was personally just super insightful for me. Um, but when you're, you know, helping someone kind of let go of that past self that they saw as the best version of themselves, quote unquote, and now they see themselves as, let's say, the worst version of themselves in their eyes specifically. Obviously, you as their coach don't see them as that. You see them where they're at, of course. But when they start taking those steps, and you kind of hit on it, um, what impact? So, have you trained anyone that for like 5, 10 years
Yeah,
at this point?
yeah.
What kind of impact has that had? Like just looking at those people who you've trained with for years upon years now. like what have you seen like your impact be in their lives and what has changed in their lives?
So this is like one of the this is the thing that keeps me like going back to coaching, right? Like the reason why I love doing it and why, someone that started off as a sports coach who loved the art of coaching and teaching people things transitioned into like to help people basically like transform. But I'll tell you a story about a client that I had at the gym, and he started with us when he was 45. And he wrote, we had in the gym, we had a wall, which was a blackboard wall. And we used to, every quarter, every 3 months, we'd get everybody to wipe their goals off and we'd rewrite their goals up. And I remember within a month of him coming in, he wrote on the board, he goes, train till I'm 50. And then, so he wrote on the board that he wants to train till, and I remembered that, and we kept going with that and we kept chipping away at it. And then 5 years later, he came to me and he goes, "Do you remember that I wrote on the board that I wanted to keep training till I was 50?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he showed me a photo. He showed me a photo of himself, like himself when he first started and when he finished. He goes, "Look at this." And like he showed, and there was complete like physical transformation. But he goes, that's like the physical transformation is great, but he was an older dad. Like he wasn't a dad until he was in his 40s for the first time. So at the time that he started with us, like I think his son was maybe it's like 5 or 6, but at that stage when he got to 50, his son was starting to play his own sports and everything like that. But he goes, the best thing, I can go and I can teach my kids cricket, I can teach them how to do, and I can run around with them, and I don't have to think twice about it. If I'd have tried to do that 5 years ago, like I wouldn't have done it. I would have actually avoided doing it in fear of being embarrassed of doing it. And like that's the thing that like when I talk to people, and when we're trying to let go of like that past self, it's like think about what the think about like 5 years from now and something that you want to do in this life that you're in now. Because your past self didn't know what it was like to have kids, didn't know what it was like to be able to run around with them, didn't know like the type of things you're avoiding because maybe you're in the best place that you could be right now. Like, and let's set goals based around that scenario. And because that scenario is a completely different scenario that you're working towards compared to whatever scenario you were working towards in your 20s, your late teens, or whatever the case might be. Because for all of us as dads, like if we can attach a goal to our family, because for most of us, like, and me included, that's like the number one priority to us. There's a very small percentage of us
100%.
that are going to give up on that, like moving forward.
100%.
And that's the thing, right? Like if we're willing to accept that we're working towards something in this phase of our life and in this chapter of our life that's going to be completely independent from something previously. And this is where like I'm not a big fan in focusing on body fat or the weight on the scales, or because they're all arbitrary numbers. And if we do the right things and we take the right actions, habits, and behaviors, those things will move in the right direction. But we also don't want to be we want to be able to go to the kid's birthday party and have a piece of cake or have a beer without like actually enjoy life. And some of those things don't allow for us to do that. And that's part of being like a well balanced dad. But and that's where, you know, we've got to understand what is it that we want to work for, what's important to us, and like then we can start to set out some goals based around that, and that is how we keep moving forward and how we keep going. But like those long-term transformations, and it takes people I think less time than what they actually think. I heard a saying, and I don't know what said it, but like as human beings, we we severely overestimate what we can do in a year and severely underestimate what we can do in 10. And like
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
that's just one thing that like that's a saying that has always stuck in my mind since I've heard it, especially as like a coach and somebody who's owned a gym and now working with people on like transformations. It's like, hey, you got to be willing to invest the time to do this because there's no magic for despite what you might read on Instagram, like there's no magic formula, there's no magic pill. It's just consistent work over a period of time. And whoever can be the most consistent over the longest period is going to see the best results.
Yeah, and I think it's funny you bring that up because, it's the same even on, the financial side of things, It's the best time to ever buy is now.
Yep.
It's 10 years ago, actually, but if you haven't done that, right now is the best time to do it.
But I think
So
kids too, having kids has a way of making us focus on the long term. Like, because we start thinking
yeah.
about their future, we start thinking about what we want, like what we want for them. And so that's why I think you see like so many dads and mums, like when they get to a point where, like yourself, Aaron, where life's kind of settled down a little bit and now I can go and commit to something that's got a bit of time for me. And they stick to something for so long because it's even though it is time for them, they almost don't see it. They see it as an investment for their kids and for their family, and that's like it's been such an eye opener for me since I've had kids. Like you'd hear sayings like, oh, I want to be this way so I can walk my daughter down the aisle, and then when you have a kid of your like you have a daughter of your own, it's like, oh, like I kind of understood the context of that, but now I get like the deeper meaning behind that. Like I understand what it is now to think like my daughter now who's turned like 18 years down the track. Like I get what it is to think that far in advance. And yeah, you know, I may have in my younger years thought it like in 5 and 10 year plans, but like I don't think I was actually thinking of things on that level.
Yeah, no, it's crazy how we go from thinking like when we're young bachelors, we're single, just kind of going through life. We think in very arbitrary, like 5 year plans, like, oh, I want to look like this. I want to be going to the gym then. I want to have this, type of life. It's very shallow. It's not very deep, like you mentioned. And then once you have kids and you have a family and you're raising these little human beings, it's like you deepen your understanding of just like life and the world and the views and everything you want to do to take care of them, and it consumes your world. It definitely consumes it,
And
but
that
you're thinking deeper.
and that's maybe not even it's not even shallow, it's just it's we're thinking of
I mean,
ourselves, which is all we really have to worry about. Like we aren't like
yeah,
at that point in life, that's all we have to worry about is ourselves. And yes, we worry about like our mom and our dad and siblings and things like that, but like what we do on a daily basis doesn't impact them or doesn't have, depending on how big it is, obviously, but it can have the ability to impact them. But like, if,
true.
but what I do on a daily basis right now with my two little humans that I've helped create in the same house as me who mimic every single thing that I do, good and bad. Like what I do on a daily basis now, my actions does affect people that are very, very important to me. So I've got to be really
Hmm.
mindful of what I do, and so then it's no longer about me; it's about them, and that can be a slippery slope the other way as well because we can lose ourselves in the process of thinking that way. So it's like it's that fine line, it's that balancing act to make sure that you're in the right you're in like in that right gray area where you're not too much about yourself and you're not too much about them. You're spending enough time on yourself to try and like benefit them long term. And it's hard. It's a very hard it's a hard thing to get to, and sometimes it's very
Hmm.
hard to get to a happy place. And like a lot of dads struggle with it. Like that was one of the main reasons why I started my podcast because and why it's been a solo podcast for the most part, because I just wanted to talk about like the things that I've been struggling with. Because like there's nothing worse than when you're in the thick of it, like feeling like you're completely alone. And that's just like and that's there wasn't a lot of there's a lot more great resources out there now, but when I first started this thing like 3 years ago, there wasn't. And that's yeah.
Yeah, and going back to what we were just touching on, for so long I was worried about, because my wife and myself, we had kids very young. Jules the same. I had to worry about being financially stable, setting up a stable home for my kids to live in. While also working on my relationship with my wife because we're both very young. So I mean, we're just growing up together. We're all growing up together. And, it finally got to the spot where, we're settled down, things are doing great, kids are doing good, where I finally got to take a look at myself. And, even now, I've been blessed that, I have a son on the way. So I have another, mouth coming into the world to feed and to teach. But, it was then when I found out, um, what kind of man do I want to project onto my family, or what kind of precedent do I want to set? What kind of example do I want to set for my family? And that's what really this push was, and it's luckily for me, God blessed me and everything lined up, correctly. But as you were saying earlier, it can be so easy to get caught in a funk like that, and where things aren't aligning and you're not able to, self or course correct,
Yeah.
you by yourself. So, what can you attest to and tell us about reaching out for help and what are some things people can do to find what they need and the resources that they can use.
I think so. This is actually going to be so, like it's different from country to country. So like in Australia, right, there's actually you can actually get free mental health help. So there's hotlines and things like that that you can actually call for free that have qualified psychologists there where you can like actually pick up the phone and talk to somebody. You can also walk into a doctor's office and you can get what's called a mental health shared care plan where you actually get five like visits to a psychologist or a counselor for free that you can go and do. So, like, one of the things, because the dads that I'm dealing with are predominantly in Australia or that I'm talking to, and so the access to free professional help, if you're really, really, really thick in it, is there, like, is there, and that's I think the one thing for like this is one thing I'm very mindful of when I talk about like mental health and this stuff, right? Like I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist. What I help arm people with is tools to help them basically organize their life and get the most out of their life. And for a lot of people I work with, that is that can help get them out of that funk. It can help turn the corner of that anxiety and depression they need. But some people like that's not enough, right? Like you need to get professional help. And if that's if you're at that point, like you need to go and get it. No amount of podcasts, no talking to your friends or anything like that will like you need to and it's there's no shame in doing that. Like you're not less of a man, you're not anything like that needs to be a path for some people. For others, we just need to be a little bit more open and honest about like how we feel and where we're at with things. Like I know for me personally, um, like talking to my close friends and actually having an open line of communication with them about exactly what was going on, like how I was feeling, emotional, like, and from like emotionally how I was going. Also, too, like if you're in a marriage or you've got a wife, you've got somebody that you're living with and you've had kids with, like talk to them as well. Like they're essentially your best friend, and sometimes it's things that you can't, and that's what your friend network's there for. But there's a lot of great initiatives in Australia that they have around mental health. Like there's one called Are You OK Day, which is a day that they have nationally where it's about asking like your mates, are you okay? And there's a lot of good stuff coming out about this. But I think one thing that I've noticed, um, there's a lot of people that comment on very deep mental health disorders that aren't equipped to do it. I try not to comment on it because I know I'm not equipped to. So I think we've got to understand where you're at, and if it seems like there's no way out and you've got nothing left, like there's no shame in going and getting professional help. Like I've done it before. I know a lot of people like in my circle that have gone and done the same thing, and it definitely does help. And it's just like one of those things you've got to do. Like if for yourself, for your family, for everyone in your life. And that's like that's one you've just got to talk. Like it's such a big thing that we don't do as men. I think we just worry that like it's seen as weak, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and this is something Jewel and I have been touching on for the past couple of weeks. And I'm so proud of Jewel. He's got his bachelor's now in psychology, and he's actually diving into this exact work. So, Jewel, what are some things you're looking forward to in this new position that you have?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. Like you mentioned, um, when it comes to a dad, it's so often that they put themselves on the back burners, and we focus so much on our families, our kids, and it can take a lot of time to come to that place where it's like, oh, it's finally me time, and that self care gets pushed way, way, way to the back burner for years upon years upon years upon years, decades for some men, like you know people from generations before us, decades that gets pushed aside, never gets talked about. And one thing that's just super important, is it's not weak to speak, and we are just incredibly behind here in the United States when it comes to these kind of services being widely available. That is something I'm emphatically passionate about. Is just we're so behind. I mean, we're both here on this podcast right now, but you're talking about in your country that someone can walk into their normal primary care doctor any given day of the week, say, "Hey, I need legit mental health help. Here's 5 free professional services for you." You can do a lot with 5 sessions of really good intensive therapy. You can do a lot. Mixing your physical with that, you're getting things right with your body, your diet, your brain, your emotions, everything like that. It's incredible what you can do with that kind of support system and that in place. But also, like you said, it's important to talk to those around you that you're around most and be vulnerable with them because they are your best friends. They are your support system. They are your backbone. You're their backbone, and they're yours. You can't, especially for dads. It's so common, like you said, that we'll just push our stuff down, we'll push it to the side. It doesn't matter. It's about them first. But at the end of the day, like I tell this to friends, I tell this to people I work with, parents, whatnot, anyone I talk to. It's like, yes, you're right. Your kid is a top priority, but your kid also deserves you to be the best version of yourself so that you can truly give them everything that you didn't have growing up. Because when a lot of people say that, I feel, and I think I told him this question, but when a lot of people say that, I feel is like I want to give my kids everything I have growing up. And they're a lot of times they're talking about material, but they're also talking about the emotional and the mental
Hmm.
support that they didn't get. And so you can't do that as a parent if you're not taking the steps forward that you need to get there, whether it's, getting into a gym, getting into a martial art, getting into running, or anything for you, for yourself, anything for you physically, I think is just next level. It's going to bring you a level of clarity that's just going to change your life. Something I, recently got back on. I got back on the wagon a few weeks ago. Just moving my body more, especially moving it more with my kids, where I take them swimming, where we hang out at the pool. They just swim around. They get all their energy out. They're exhausted come 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. I love it. It's the best, especially being a single dad with the two. Um, but like they're moving their body and they're having so much fun. And we're having fun together. And heck, I'm tired too because I'm chasing them around the pool, but my body's moving. And then I'm going to the gym. I'm there in the gym more. I'm exposed to the environment. I'm more open to try new things. Like over the last couple of weeks, I've tried a freaking yoga Pilates class mix that was sore for 3 days after that. And then I did a karate class the next week. First time ever doing any kind of martial art. It was difficult. I was out of place. But at the same time, I wasn't because, like, you got to start. You got to start somewhere. You got to start at some point in your life. And, you kind of mentioned that well balanced dad diet. it's there's so many things that go into that. That well balanced dad diet, and you've hit on pretty much all of it. Hard work, values, dedication, commitment, long term goals, uh, discipline. So many things that are so important. Open communication, being vulnerable with yourself. Um, how do you translate that for someone? Yes, you can translate it to them in the gym in that setting, but how are you? What's that take home message for these clients for that well balanced dad diet? I'm gonna patent pending on that one.
That's
Um,
you should.
but no, seriously, how does that well balanced dad diet? How does that translate from the gym to the home for you personally, and for what you work with how you coach your clients to transfer that?
So so I think geez, that's a good question. I mean, how it kind of translates across. It just allows you to do more and be more effective with your time. Like it just that's by ticking the boxes and filling your own cup and doing the things that are important to you. It becomes then about like quality over quantity, and you mentioned going and running around and swimming with your kids and stuff like that. If you weren't physically able, like none of that becomes quality time. And I've met plenty of dads and I've heard plenty of stories about, hey, I get home from work and the only thing I want to do is I want to sit on the couch with a beer and watch TV. And the kids are there
Oh,
and
that drives me crazy, man. It drives me crazy because it's like you just lost out on, like, it's hard. It's hard when you're a single parent. You only have your kids half the time, and many dads have them far less than that than me. I'm very fortunate that I have them half the time, but that drives me bonkers.
but
It's like, why?
this is I think it's the lack of appreciation. Like when they're there all the time, you don't appreciate the time that you've got. Like they don't have that again, like drawing back to one of the points in the healthy dad diet that you're talking about, like that long-term mindset of like and even short-term mindset, like this isn't going to last forever. Like it's something that plays on my mind all the time when it comes to my kids. Like I shared a
Yeah,
post this morning about like my like I'll go for a walk most mornings if I'm not doing jujitsu in the mornings. Like I'll generally start my morning with a walk, and for me it's usually like a little bit of like reflection, or I'll put like
so
a podcast on or something like that. I'll go for a walk. But the last couple of weeks, like my son's been wanting to come with me. And I don't want, like, I want him to come out. We've got a beautiful area, like with some wetlands and some lakes. The ducks are like there and everything like that. So I'll stick him in his trike and I'll go for a walk. Now, I'll get this kind of talk in the back of my head where it's like, you should still be learning something. You're missing out on time for this. This is going to help you move the business forward. And I'm like, yeah, but also on top of that, this is also time I'm not going to be able to get back with my son. And that's for me, that's like this experience will only ever happen once. And that's like, yes, there might be different iterations of a very similar experience, but he may never ask me again like he did this morning, can birds go to space? And as funny
I
as
love that. No, I'm looking at the post right
and
now.
and as funny as that sounds, like that is like, thinking of things on that level and being so appreciative of those things. Then all of a sudden, when you've got the urge to go and sit on the couch and drink a beer with the kids in the room, it's like, well, what else could I be doing with this time with them? And if
Yes.
you're so exhausted to a point where you can't concentrate doing something else because you're not physically capable of doing it, then you need to make the appropriate steps to shift that. And that's how it filters
Yes.
into everything else. Like because then it's like, all right, well, because I haven't physically done what I need to take care of myself. It's not only affecting them, it's affecting them because of the time that I'm spending with them. But if you want to be
Mm,
like, if you want to take a selfish mindset to it, like have a think about the guilt that you're going to have in 5 years' time when you've done that consistently for 5 years and you haven't made the change and you can't get that time back with them. Like as shitty as that sounds, like
True.
that's the reality of it, right? Like that, and
Yeah.
that's and some people, unfortunately, like they need to have that real long, hard talk to themselves because like
Mhm.
it's just the reality of it. It's not trying to make them feel worse about their situation or anything like that. But if you keep doing the same thing and getting the same result, like isn't that's the definition of insanity, isn't it? Isn't that the old saying? Like,
Yes, yes, it is. Yes,
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
it's doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
that's
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
and I mean at the end of the day, that's the point, right? Like if there's something that you're not happy with that inherently you want to change, if you're not taking the steps to, and this is going to sound very motivational speaker again, but if you're not taking the appropriate steps to change that, which are different from the steps that you're taking now, like there's only one person you can blame when it gets 5 years down the track and all that regret is there because you haven't been able to spend that time that you wanted to with your kids. Like there's at that point there's no one else to blame, and that's where shift, like we spoke about earlier, shifting that mentality from reasons and excuses is because you feel tired a reason, or is it an excuse? Because realistically it's an excuse, right? Like I feel
Yeah.
tired, like and you're being a little bit lazy about it, but if you like physically feel like you can't move at all, the underlying problem is not everything else. It's that, hey, maybe I need to do something to try and improve my physical state so that I don't feel like this at the end of the day. And that might mean you need to take 3 afternoons a week where you're not sitting on the couch and drinking beer and actually go to the gym and do something, or go to jujitsu and like, get yourself moving, go for a run, go for a walk. Like a big thing I've done with a lot of people in this program who are in, pretty bad shape, it's like, hey, all I want you to do is I want you to go for a walk 30 minutes 5 times a week. And that's going to be our starting point. Like you do 5 30-minute walks a week, two things that's going to do. That's going to start to help you etch out that time for yourself. That's number one,
Hmm.
because that's if you can do that, and after you've told me you don't have time, then we're off to a pretty good start. And then secondly, if you're doing absolutely zero physical activity, it's going to start to tick that box as well too. And then from there, if we do that for a 2 to 3 week period, we're able to be consistent with it. All right, then we might do, hey, let's do some squats and stuff before we get into like before we go for our walk now, and just incrementally increase things and start to increase that activity as we go
Yeah.
through. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but if you're in that position and you don't change it, there's really no one else to point the finger at but the man in the mirror.
Very true. And I feel like that's very true for a lot of men. It's very true for a lot of men where maybe it's just me talking here because it's very true for myself. Aaron knows this, but I'm my own worst enemy. I am the anti-hero and the antagonist and protagonist, or whatever it's called, of my own story.
You're,
I went,
you're the
I went,
antagonist. You're,
yeah, that
you're the
one.
antagonist in your own story.
Yeah, I'm my own antagonist in my own story, and I feel like that's true for a lot of men. Like I'm in a couple dad groups on Facebook, and these dudes are just beating themselves up so freaking hard. Like it's my fault. What can I do to change this situation? What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? There's a dude I work with. He's always like complaining about his girlfriend and baby mama, whatever, and just like, yeah, she just has me do all this extra stuff. I don't know why, and I just do it and keep her happy, whatever. And it's like, dude, we're the same age, and yet I'm your boss. Like, granted, everyone has a different path, a different life choices, different things they do, things like that. But it's like, where's you're burnt out, dude. Like I can see it. You're burnt out with your family, and I feel like that's one of the worst places to be, and that's where a lot of men are because they're not taking, like you're saying, they're not taking that 30 minutes a day just to go and walk. There's so many benefits to just walking. You're moving your body, you're outside, you're getting fresh air, you're getting sun, vitamin D, you're you're moving, you're increasing your longevity, you're improving yourself. You in that same aspect, you're eliminating a very basic excuse of, oh, I don't have time. You have the time. It's all about just how you're using it.
Yeah. 100%.
I just it's just very true. So let's wrap up here. Let's bring it back home for you. When you're one thing that you're excellent at here, one thing that I see all over your pages and whatnot is creating a worldview for your clients and for them, but bring it back down to a personal level. When you're helping create a worldview for your kids, what does that look like? And how do you want them to view the world? When it's all said and done, at the end of the day, what's the worldview of your kids going out into the great, big, scary world, especially if they come to the U.S.? Keep them in Australia.
That's
um,
this is I don't know, this might sound a little bit esoteric, but it's not about how you view the world, it's how you view yourself is like the big thing that like I'm trying to get my kids to understand, especially my daughter, right? As a like young ladies are so susceptible to the way the
yes.
world is right now. And it
Yep,
is
100%. I mean, we have 4 girls, 5 girls total on this podcast right now
yeah,
between the 3 of us. So,
yeah, and it's about how you view yourself. And it's the same for my son too. Like if you say you're going to do something, do it. On a deeper level, understand what is inside your circle of control and what is outside of it, and be real about that. Accept the things that are outside of your circle of control, and then take the action to move the needle on the things that are inside of your control. Like they're the big things that I've noticed with my daughter, like as she's gotten older and she's in a third year of formal schooling and things like that. So she's getting exposed to more of this stuff. And the way the world is at the moment can create so much angst and anxiety for everybody, let alone like let alone a 7 year
mm-hmm.
old. And it's like,
Yeah,
hey, there's so much noise and there's so much stuff that goes on that you can't control 90% of it. But you can control how you feel about yourself. You can control the action that you take and being true to that action. And that's the bit that like that's the thing that I just keep trying to hammer home to them. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to a wall, but if I keep saying it and we keep showing it, like proving it to them through my actions as well, then hopefully as we hit those teenage years, it might sink in.
yeah, hopefully. Well, Matt, it was amazing talking to you, man. And there's so many things to draw from here, but I think we're going to title this episode "The Well Balanced Dad Diet." And there's so many things included in that. One big thing that we didn't dive deep into, but we've talked about it consistently on this show, is being present. Being present with your kids, putting down the beer, putting down the I just want to kick my feet up and be left alone, watch TV. Kick off that 1920s mindset, and get up and be present with your kids. Play a card game with them, do something with them, color with them. Your kids love you and they want to spend that time with you. They're desperate for that with you. And that's all they want. That's all they want. And kids will always remember who showed up. They will always remember who showed up, who was there for them when they needed them, and when they didn't. Because when they need you, and you weren't there for them the first time, or all those other times just doing basic stuff with them, building that relationship with them, answering the questions like you with your son, like, do birds fly to space? Now he knows he can go with you to you for the most ridiculous thing. And he also knows later in life it's going to be in his brain, oh, I can go to dad for something. I asked him freaking do birds fly to space when I was 4. I haven't stopped hearing about that. Now I'm 16, but now I actually need to talk to him about something serious. And I know he's got my back. I know he's gonna talk to me, and I just feel that's so important. Be present. Be part of their world. The same dedication that you would give to yourself, you give to your kids, but you also have to make sure you're giving it to yourself. Instill those values on yourself. Set your own goals. Work hard for your goals. Self dedication, self commitment, self discipline, self love. All those things included in the well balanced dad diet or the healthy dad diet. Um, and Yeah, Aaron, anything from you?
Yeah, the last little tidbit I want to leave with you guys today is, I forgot where I heard it, but, you know, when your kids are young, it's the only time where they don't have to commit their time to something else, really, besides school. So if you choose to sit back and indulge in, things that are going to take your short-term attention away from the stress and whatever, once they become even teenagers, young teenagers, their time starts going away. And so that's even less time for you to spend with them, even less time to make memories. And then once they get to young adults, they're in the same boat as that you are right now. They're managing their time, they're managing their relationship. So it really starts like Matt said, when they're young, you got to build that strong foundation. You have to you be that open book, be vulnerable, be there, be present, be active. Set that example for them to to really help them throughout their young lives, in order for them to have a good course of to follow throughout their life.
100%. And Matt, go ahead and first question is, I need one of those UDP shirts, long sleeve black preferably.
No
Take
problem.
I'll pre-order one of those, but um, go ahead and leave the listeners with anything you want to leave them to wrap us up here. You get the last word, and plug yourself away as well.
Cool. Well, that you can find me on Instagram is at the Unstoppable Dad. Facebook's the Unstoppable Dad Project. My podcast is the Unstoppable Dad Project. At solo podcast myself, just going through tips and tricks that I've come across from my time as a dad, and also through being a coach for the last 15 years, and just my personal journey, my struggles that I've had with my mental health at different times, and just day to day dad, week to week dad life. So it's called the Unstoppable Dad Project. You can find it on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google, and that's probably where you can go to find me for any information. But I appreciate your time, guys. It's been unreal chatting to you. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, it's been great. We can't wait. We'd love to have you on again.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Hey, hey, you, are you still here with me? Thank you so much for listening all the way to the very end. Definitely appreciate it. Don't forget to leave 5 stars, leave a comment, leave a review. Head over to YouTube, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the social medias, even TikTok, and all of those links, plus every single deal that we have in affiliation, you can find in our link tree. Just by going to the show notes, clicking the link tree link, it really does help us just with likes, 5 stars, subscribes, all of that. It's a great way to support us, and it really helps us keep going. We really appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Can't wait to be with you next week.